Virgin against the arrogant CEO's rules. No underwear when you are with me. The contract had 17 pages. Nora had only read 11. She knew that now. Standing in the marble-floored entryway of the most intimidating penthouse she had ever seen in her 23 years of living, because page 12, apparently, was where things got interesting. Read it aloud. His voice came from across the room, low, unbothered. No, the voice of a man who had never once been told no and had stopped expecting it years ago. Nora's eyes dropped back to the paper in her hands. Her fingers had gone slightly numb. The chandelier above her head was larger than her entire bedroom, back in Clover Falls, Ohio, and the man standing at the floor-to-ceiling window, hands clasped behind his back, hadn't even turned around to look at her yet. That somehow made it worse. She cleared her throat. Mr. Kane, Dominic. He still hadn't turned. I don't repeat myself. She looked down at the page again. Clause 14, Section B. The words were printed in the same clean, professional font as the rest of the contract, as if they were completely normal, as if lawyers had sat around a mahogany table and typed this without a single raised eyebrow. While residing in the Kane private residence and serving in the capacity of live-in personal coordinator, the employee shall adhere to all household conduct standards as outlined by Mr. Dominic Kane. Conduct standards are non-negotiable, non-amendable, and binding for the duration of the 12-month contract. That part she'd read. That part had seemed fine. It was the subclause beneath it, handwritten in the margin of her copy, initialed in sharp black ink, that had stopped her breathing. No underwear. When you are in my presence, non-negotiable. Nora's face was the color of a tomato fresh off her grandmother's vine. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. She pressed her lips together and tried again. There's a handwritten note on my copy, on page 12. Silence. Then slowly, Dominic Kane turned around. She had seen his photo online, of course. Everyone in the country had seen his photo online. Forbes, Business Insider, 3 different magazine covers in the past year alone. She had prepared herself, or thought she had, for the reality of him. Sharp jaw, dark eyes, the kind of face that looked like it had been designed by someone with a grudge against ordinary people. But photographs, she was learning, did not capture the way the man occupied space. He stood still, and somehow the entire room rearranged itself around him. His gaze dropped to the paper in her hands, then to her face. He assessed her the way she imagined he assessed quarterly reports. Quickly, thoroughly, with no emotional involvement whatsoever. You found the addendum, he said. She exhaled. Yes, I found the addendum. And? Nora Calloway had grown up in a town of 4,000 people. She had attended the same church her whole life, helped her mother run a hardware store on Main Street, and had never, not once, been in a situation that her Sunday school upbringing had not at least partially prepared her for. This was a new experience. And I have questions, she said. One with as much dignity as a woman holding a humiliating contract in a stranger's penthouse could manage. Something moved across his face. It wasn't quite a smile. It was more like the shadow of one. The ghost of amusement from a man who had surgically removed warmth from his personality and had no intention of retrieving it. The position pays 4 times what your previous employer offered, he said. The benefits package is unmatched. The contract is 12 months. You signed the main agreement this morning in my attorney's office. He tilted his head just slightly. The addendum was always part of the arrangement, Miss Calloway. You simply didn't read far enough. The quiet in the room pressed against her ears. Outside, 40 stories below, the city moved and breathed and shouted. Up here, there was only the hum of expensive climate control and the sound of Nora trying very hard not to say something she couldn't take back. Why? She asked. He blinked. Just once, as if the question was foreign. Why that rule? She pressed, because apparently her survival instinct had taken the afternoon off. Out of everything you could have put in a conduct clause, punctuality, dress code, phone usage, why that? Dominic Kane looked at her for a long moment. Because it is my house, he said simply. And I make the rules. He turned back to the window. Your room is on the east wing. Third door on the left. Dinner is at 7. Hawk, you are not to be late. A pause. And Miss Calloway. She was already clutching the contract to her chest like a shield. The addendum, he said without turning, is not optional. Nora stood in the most beautiful entryway she had ever seen, in a city 1,000 miles from everything she had ever known, holding a contract that had just detonated quietly in her hands. She thought about the phone call she'd made to her mother 3 weeks ago. Mom, I got a job offer in New York, a live-in position, full benefits. I think this is my chance. And the way her mother had clapped so loud it had crackled through the speaker. She thought about her savings account, about her little sister's college fund that she'd quietly promised to help with, about the reason she'd said yes in the first place. Then she looked down at page 12 one more time. No underwear. When you are in my presence. She folded the contract in half, then in half again, tucked it under her arm. Would dinner at 7, she repeated to his back. Sharp, he confirmed. Nora Calloway picked up her single suitcase, the one with the broken wheel that spun sideways, which she had not had the budget to replace, and dragged it across 3,000 square feet of imported marble toward the east wing. She had 11 months, 30 days, and approximately 6 hours to figure out how to survive this. Does this hook grip you? Nora just walked into a war she doesn't know how to fight, and he just met the first person who asked him why. The East Wing guest room was the size of Nora's entire apartment back in Clover Falls. She stood in the doorway for a full 30 seconds, just looking at it. A king-size bed dressed in ivory linen, curtains that pooled on the floor like something out of a magazine. A window seat overlooking the city that glittered 40 stories below, like someone had spilled a jar of gold dust across the dark. A bathroom, she peeked, with a soaking tub and heated floors and small glass bottles of products that probably cost more than her monthly grocery budget. Her broken-wheeled suitcase sat in the middle of it all like a confession. She sat on the edge of the bed, gently as if asking permission, and pulled out her phone. 3 missed calls from her mother. One text from her best friend Danny that read, "Girl, if you don't send me a picture of this penthouse right now, I will never forgive you." Nora took a picture of the ceiling. Then she opened her contacts, scrolled to Mom, Home, and pressed call before she could talk herself out of it. It rang once. Nora Jean Calloway, I have been waiting by this phone since 2 o'clock. Hi, Mama. How is it? How is New York? How is the apartment? Is it safe? Are the locks good? No, I read an article about... Mama. Nora exhaled slowly. She lay back against the ivory duvet and stared up at the ceiling. It's fine. Everything's fine. A pause. Her mother had raised 2 daughters and could detect fine from 60 miles away. What happened?
If you're enjoying the story so far, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel grow and lets me keep bringing you more amazing love stories. All right, back to the story.
Nothing happened. She pressed her lips together. The contract has some unusual clauses. What kind of unusual? Workplace conduct things. It's probably normal for this level of... It's probably just a New York thing. Another pause, longer this time. Nora, I'm handling it, Mama. I just wanted to hear your voice. She could hear her mother exhale slowly on the other end. The same exhale Nora had heard after her father left, after the hardware store's roof needed replacing, after every hard thing that had landed on their small family without warning. The exhale that said, we don't collapse. We figure it out. Kurt, you call me if anything feels wrong, her mother said finally. Promise me. I promise. And eat something. You always forget to eat when you're nervous. Nora smiled at the ceiling, just barely. I'll eat, Mama. She hung up and lay there for a moment, the city humming 40 floors below her, the silence of the penthouse pressing in around her, like something expensive and unfamiliar. Then she thought about Lily. Her little sister was 18, bright, funny. They wanted to study environmental science at a university that had sent her a scholarship offer covering 70% of tuition. 70% was wonderful. 70% was not 100%. And their mother's hardware store had been running on thin margins since the new big box store opened outside of town 3 years ago. Nora had done the math on the train to New York. 12 months at Dominic Kane's salary, even after taxes, not even after sending money home, would cover Lily's remaining tuition and leave enough for a small cushion. It was the kind of number that made a person sign contracts on page 11 and not read far enough. She sat up. She was here. The contract was signed. The addendum was... She unfolded the paper from under her arm and looked at it one more time. Non-negotiable. Nora Calloway had grown up practical. Practicality was what happened when life didn't leave room for fragility. So she folded the paper again, tucked it into the front pocket of her suitcase, and stood up. She had 4 hours until dinner. She spent them unpacking slowly, learning the geography of the room, figuring out which light switches did what, and trying very hard not to think about the rule. Dominic Kane's home office occupied the entire northern corner of the penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 2 walls, not decorative ones, actual books, spines cracked and pages marked, which was the first thing about the man that didn't fit the image she'd assembled of him. His desk was the size of a dining table, 3 monitors, a legal pad covered in handwriting so precise it looked almost typeset. He was on the phone when his chief of staff, Marcus Webb, knocked and entered without waiting, because Marcus had been with Dominic for 9 years and had developed selective immunity to intimidation. Dominic held up one finger without looking up. Marcus sat in the chair across from the desk and waited, scrolling through his tablet with the patience of a man who had learned to work within the rhythms of someone else's intensity. When the call ended, Dominic set the phone down and finally looked up. "The Calloway girl arrived," Marcus said. "I'm aware. She's in the East Wing. She found the addendum." Dominic's expression didn't shift. "Also aware." Marcus set the tablet down on his knee and looked at his employer with the specific expression he reserved for conversations that Dominic was going to find irritating. "Dom, you can't just... It's in the contract. It's insane is what it is. You know that, right? I'm your chief of staff, and I'm telling you, as a professional and as someone who has watched you run off 4 personal coordinators in the past 8 months, you cannot keep doing this." Dominic turned back to his legal pad. "The rule is non-negotiable." "Why?" Marcus asked. The same word the girl had used, apparently, because something almost imperceptible moved across Dominic's jaw. "Give me one reason that makes sense for a man who runs a $12 billion company." Silence. "Because," Dominic said finally without looking up, "hey, I don't need another person in my space who is performing. Everyone in my orbit performs, Marcus. Every assistant, every coordinator, He paused, set the pen down. "The rule removes pretense. Immediately. Either they leave or they stay, and they're real. I don't have patience for anything in between." Marcus stared at him. "That," Marcus said slowly, "is the most elaborate and disturbing logic I have ever heard. When I once watched you negotiate a merger for 16 consecutive hours. You're dismissed. She's different from the others, you know." Marcus stood, picking up his tablet. "She didn't storm out. She didn't call her lawyer. She asked you why." He paused at the door. "When's the last time someone asked you why?" Dominic didn't answer. Marcus left. The office settled back into its usual quiet. The precise, a controlled quiet that Dominic had constructed around himself over years of deliberate effort. No clutter, no noise. No one who stayed long enough to become familiar. He picked up the pen again. He did not, for the following 3 hours, think about the look on her face when she found page 12. The way her chin had lifted even as her ears went pink. The way she hadn't cried or threatened or performed outrage. She had asked why, as if she actually expected an answer worth hearing. Nora arrived at the dining room at 6:58. She had changed into a clean white blouse tucked into high-waisted navy trousers. The nicest thing she'd packed, with her hair pulled back and her small gold earrings that had been her grandmother's. She looked neat and composed, and she had given herself a quiet pep talk in the bathroom mirror that had involved the words "Lily's tuition" repeated 4 times like a mantra. The dining room was long and dim and beautiful, lit by candles she suspected were lit every night regardless of company, because this was the kind of household that had standards rather than occasions. She sat in the chair that seemed least presumptuous, the one to the right of the head of the table, and folded her hands and waited. At exactly 7, Dominic Kane walked in. He had changed too. Dark trousers, a white shirt, open one button at the collar. No jacket. It was the most undone she had seen him, which was to say he still looked like he could command a boardroom on 3 seconds' notice and make everyone in it feel quietly inadequate. He sat at the head of the table without looking at her. A woman appeared silently from the kitchen, older, efficient, carrying 2 shallow bowls, and set them down without being spoken to. "Helena," Dominic said. "Sir," she said, and disappeared. Nora looked at the soup. It smelled extraordinary. She thought about her mother's kitchen, in the smell of cornbread and old wood and the radio playing softly, and felt the distance of 1,000 miles settle quietly in her chest. "You're from Ohio," Dominic said. She looked up. He was lifting his spoon with the economy of motion of a man who did not waste energy on anything, including eating. "Clover Falls," she said. "Yes. Small. 4,000 people. Why New York?" She considered the question. The honest answer was, "My sister needs tuition money, and this was the best offer I'd ever received." The diplomatic answer was something about opportunity and ambition and growth. She picked up her spoon. "My family needed it," she said, because she was from a small town and had not yet learned to dress practicality up as something more palatable. He looked at her then, really looked, for the first time since the entryway. Something moved through his expression too quickly for her to name. "The addendum stands," he said. She met his eyes. "I know. You're not going to argue it again? Would arguing change it?" A pause. "No," he said. "Then I'm not going to argue it." She looked back at her soup. "I'm going to do my job, Mr. Kane. I'm very good at my job. And in 12 months, I'm going to take my salary and go home. And you're going to be exactly the same as you are right now." The silence that followed was the longest of the evening. When she looked up, he was watching her with an expression she couldn't read, and she had the distinct, unsettling feeling that Dominic Kane was a man who was very rarely surprised, and that she had just surprised him. The candles flickered between them. Neither of them spoke again for the rest of the meal, but the silence had changed shape, shifted from cold to something else entirely. Something Nora didn't have a name for yet, and wasn't sure she wanted to find one. She was here for Lily. She was here for 12 months. She was absolutely, completely, 100% not here to understand Dominic Kane. She told herself that 3 times before she finished her soup. It almost worked. She came for her sister. He's never had anyone stay for something that wasn't about him. And dinner just became the most loaded silence either of them has ever shared. The first morning arrived like a test. Nora woke at 5:30 out of habit. The hardware store back home had opened at 6, and her body had never received the memo that she was allowed to sleep past sunrise anymore. She lay in the enormous bed for exactly 4 minutes, staring at the ceiling, listening to the city breathe 40 floors below. Then she got up, washed her face, brushed her teeth, and stood in front of her open suitcase for a long time. The rule lived in the front pocket of the suitcase, folded into quarters. She had thought about it. Of course she had thought about it. She was human in 23 and had grown up in a house where modesty was simply the air you breathed. She had turned it over in her mind the way you turned over a problem you couldn't solve yet, examining it from every angle, looking for the version of it that made sense. What she had landed on, somewhere around 2 in the morning, was this. The rule was strange and invasive and deeply uncomfortable. It was also technically survivable. And he wasn't asking her to do anything that would compromise her safety. He wasn't asking her to perform or display or be humiliated publicly. The rule existed, as far as she could tell, entirely within the confines of the penthouse, in the course of her normal duties. It was a power move, a test, a wall he'd built to keep people from getting comfortable. Nora Calloway had grown up watching her mother hold a family together, with nothing but stubbornness and grace. She had not traveled 1,000 miles to be run off by a man who had trust issues and a very expensive lawyer. She got dressed, white cotton blouse, wide-leg cream trousers, her small gold earrings, simple flats. She folded her underwear back into the drawer. Her face was the color of the trousers by the time she finished, but she pressed her lips together, squared her shoulders, and walked out the door. She was a professional. She was here for Lily. She was absolutely not going to think about it. The penthouse kitchen was the kind of kitchen that belonged to someone who had excellent taste and never cooked. Nora found this out when she opened the refrigerator at 5:50 in the morning and discovered 4 bottles of still water, 2 containers of something from a restaurant with a name she couldn't pronounce, 1 block of imported cheese, and a single apple that looked like it had been placed there decoratively. She opened 3 cabinets, found glassware, found a coffee system that looked like it belonged in a laboratory, found eventually actual coffee beans and a grinder, and decided that this at least she could handle. She was on her second attempt at figuring out the machine. It had a touch screen, which felt excessive for something whose only job was to make coffee, when a voice came from directly behind her. "You're up early." She spun around. Dominic Kane stood in the kitchen doorway in dark athletic pants and a gray-fitted shirt, hair slightly less composed than the previous evening, which on him still looked deliberate somehow. He had clearly just returned from somewhere. There was a faint alertness in his posture, a residual energy. He ran in the mornings, she would learn. 6 miles. Every day. Non-negotiable. Like most things about him. She turned back to the coffee machine. "Yes, I'm sorry. I didn't realize you'd be up. I was just trying to figure out This machine is very complicated for something that's just supposed to..." "Press the 3rd button from the left, then the one below it." She pressed them. The machine began making a sound like quiet, expensive success. She became very focused on watching it work. The rule sat between them in the air of the kitchen, like a presence she couldn't look at directly, which was exactly the problem. The more she tried not to think about it, the more she thought about it, and she could feel the warmth climbing from her collarbone toward her ears, and there was absolutely nothing she could do about it. "There's no food," she said, because talking felt safer than silence. "I have a chef. He comes Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday." "It's Monday." "I'm aware." She turned around to face him, because retreating felt like losing something. He was leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed, watching her with that same unreadable quality he seemed to wear like a second skin. "I can cook," she said, "if that's something you'd want. As part of the... It's not in the contract, but I'm happy to..." "It's not in the contract." "I know, I'm offering." He studied her for a moment. "Why?" There was that question again. Her question, turned around and handed back to her. "Because the refrigerator has 1 apple and some imported cheese," she said, "and that's not a breakfast. And because I like cooking. And because..." She stopped herself before she said, "Because being useful makes me feel less out of place in your enormous, intimidating penthouse. Because it seems practical." Something shifted almost imperceptibly in his expression. "Fine," he said. He pushed off the doorframe. "I'll have Marcus send you the household account details. You can order groceries through the building concierge." He moved to the cabinet, retrieved a glass, filled it with water, and then drank it at the counter with his back half turned to her. She watched the coffee machine finish its cycle. This, she realized, was what her days were going to look like. This close, this quiet, the rule sitting invisibly between them in every shared room. She poured 2 cups of coffee before she thought about it, just automatically the way she would have in her mother's kitchen for anyone who happened to be standing nearby. She set one on the counter beside him. He looked at it, asked then at her. "I didn't ask for that," he said. "No," she agreed and carried her own cup to the window seat at the far end of the kitchen, tucking her feet up and looking out at the city waking up below them, pink gold light just beginning to push between the buildings. She heard him pick up the cup. He didn't say thank you, but he picked it up and she heard him drink, and somehow that felt like more than words from a man like Dominic Kane. By Wednesday, she had a routine. Up at 5:30, addressed, she had found a system for herself, a way of getting through the morning that involved not overthinking, not looking in the mirror longer than necessary, and moving through the discomfort with the kind of brisk practicality her mother would have recognized. Coffee on before 6, groceries organized. His schedule for the day pulled up on the household management app Marcus had given her access to. The job itself was not what she had expected, so she had expected cold efficiency, orders barked, tasks assigned, the transactional rhythm of serving someone who saw her as a function rather than a person. What she found instead was a complicated ecosystem. Dominic Kane ran 3 companies and sat on 2 boards and maintained a social calendar he clearly despised and had more people trying to access his time than he had hours available to give them. He was not disorganized. He was oversaturated. And the 4 coordinators before her had apparently managed this by being afraid of him, which had helped no one. Nora was not afraid of him. She was deeply, profoundly uncomfortable around him, which was different. On Wednesday afternoon, she knocked on his office door, opened it without waiting for an answer because Marcus had told her that was the protocol, set a revised copy of his Thursday schedule on the corner of his desk and said, "You have a conflict at 2. Had the Hargrove call and the Singapore team overlap by 40 minutes. I moved Singapore to 4:30 and had Marcus brief them. Hargrove has been notified." He looked up from his monitor. "I didn't authorize. You were in back-to-back calls all morning. The window to fix it was closing. I fixed it." She turned to leave. "You can tell me if you want me to ask permission next time. But you'll want to know that asking permission would have cost you the Singapore relationship." She was at the door when he spoke. "How do you know that?" She paused. "I looked up your history with the Singapore account on the company file Marcus gave me access to. You've rescheduled them twice before. They're already thin. A third reschedule without a direct, personal notification from their primary contact, which was you, would have read as disrespect." She glanced back. "And I had Marcus send a brief note on your behalf, apologetic but confident. They responded within the hour." He stared at her. "Close the door on your way out," he said. She did. In the hallway, she exhaled very slowly and pressed her back against the wall for just a moment, heart beating slightly faster than normal, because apparently competence under pressure was something her body still needed a moment to recover from. From inside the office, she heard nothing. Then very quietly, she heard him pick up his phone. "Marcus." A pause. "The Callaway girl. Adjust her access level. Give her full calendar authority." Nora walked back to her workstation with her chin up and a warmth in her chest she told herself was just professional satisfaction. Just professional. It was Thursday evening when it happened. She had been in the penthouse for 4 days. She had developed, without meaning to, a precise awareness of where he was in the apartment at any given moment. The sound of his office chair. The specific quality of silence when he was reading versus working. The way he moved through the kitchen at night, quiet and deliberate, when he thought the rest of the world was asleep. She had been coming back from the building's lower floor laundry room. The penthouse had its own, but she'd taken a wrong elevator. When she turned a corner in the east hallway and walked directly into him. Not metaphorically, directly into him. Her stack of folded laundry went sideways. He caught her by the elbow with a reflexive precision that suggested excellent spatial awareness and possibly years of people stumbling in his vicinity. She grabbed the first stable thing available, his forearm, and they stood there 2 feet apart, his hand on her elbow, her hand on his arm, surrounded by her fallen laundry, her white blouse, her cream trousers, and the small folded items that had slid out from between them and now lay on the hallway floor in a quiet, devastating little pile. The silence lasted approximately 1,000 years. Nora looked at the floor. Then she looked up at him. His jaw had done something complicated. He was very carefully not looking at the floor. Those are from... I wasn't... She stopped, closed her eyes for 1 second, opened them. "I was doing laundry," she said with tremendous dignity. "I can see that," he said. His voice was perfectly even, which was either merciful or the cruelest thing she had ever experienced. He released her elbow. She crouched down and gathered everything quickly, efficiently, repacked her arms and stood up and looked at a point just past his left shoulder. "Dinner tomorrow is at 7, she said. "I'm making pasta. Is there anything you're allergic to?" A beat. "No," he said. "Great." She moved around him. "Good night, mister." Kane." "Dominic," he said quietly, to her back. She kept walking. In her room with the door closed and the laundry dumped on the bed in a graceless pile, Nora sat on the floor against the door and pressed both hands over her face and breathed in and out until her heartbeat normalized. The rule had stopped being abstract tonight. The rule was real, and he knew it was real, and she had just looked him in the eye afterward and talked about pasta. She started laughing very quietly, itched into her palms. Because if she didn't laugh, she was going to have to sit with something much more complicated. The fact that in the brief electric moment when his hand had closed around her elbow, steadying her, warm and certain, she had not wanted him to let go. She walked into his world prepared to be invisible. He gave her full calendar authority by Thursday, and somewhere between the coffee she made him without being asked and the hallway that swallowed them both whole, something shifted that neither of them is ready to name. 3 weeks in, Nora stopped counting the days, not because she had forgotten about Lily's tuition, or the 12-month contract, or the rule that still lived in the front pocket of her suitcase like a folded secret. She hadn't forgotten any of it. Or she had simply, without noticing the exact moment it happened, stopped experiencing the penthouse as a sentence to be served and started experiencing it as a place she existed in, which was, she recognized, either a sign of healthy adaptation or the beginning of something she should be paying closer attention to. She chose not to examine it too carefully. The routine had settled into its shape the way routines do, not through planning, but through repetition. Coffee before 6. His schedule reviewed and adjusted before he emerged from his morning run. Breakfast on the counter. She had started cooking actual meals, real ones, the kind her mother made, and he ate them without comment, but with a consistency that told her everything she needed to know. Office hours from 8 to 6, during which she moved through the penthouse with the quiet efficiency of someone who had found their rhythm. Dinner at 7. It was the dinners that were doing something to her. She hadn't anticipated the dinners. The first week, they had eaten in silence, or near silence. He asked occasional operational questions. She answered them. The candles burned. Helena cleared the plates. It was professional and civilized, and about as warm as the marble floors. The second week, something loosened, almost against his will. It had started with the risotto. She had made it on a Wednesday, a proper one, and the kind that required 30 minutes of patient stirring and good stock, and the imported Parmesan she'd found in the back of the specialty cabinet. She hadn't thought much of it. She'd grown up cooking. He had taken one bite and gone very still. "My mother made this," he said. It came out flat, declarative, like a fact being filed. But his fork had stopped moving, and he was looking at his plate with an expression she had never seen on him before. Something unguarded and brief, like a window blown open by accident. It closed almost immediately. He finished the meal without saying anything else. But the next morning there was a handwritten note on her workstation, his precise, almost typeset handwriting, that said only, "Stock the Parmesan, standing order." Nora had held the note for a moment longer than necessary. Then she'd added it to the household account and told herself it meant nothing. By the third week, they were talking at dinner, not about feelings, not about anything that required vulnerability or admission. They talk the way two intelligent people talk when they're trying not to talk about the thing they're actually thinking about, carefully, interestingly, with more attention than the subjects technically warranted. He asked about Clover Falls. She described it. The main street with its 12 shops, the lake at the edge of town that froze solid every January, slaughtered the way everyone knew everyone, and this was simultaneously the best and most suffocating thing about small-town life. She watched him listen with the focused attention of someone encountering a foreign country through a travel documentary, genuinely curious in the way of a man who had grown up in glass towers and couldn't quite imagine what grass underfoot felt like. She asked about his companies, carefully, professionally, the way she would in a business context. He answered with a precision and depth that made her realize, slowly, that what read as coldness from the outside was actually something closer to intensity. He cared about the work, deeply, privately, in a way he clearly didn't expect anyone around him to notice. She noticed. She also noticed the way he refilled her water glass before his own, without seeming aware he was doing it. The way he angled slightly toward her when she spoke, just barely, a fraction of a degree. The way his jaw relaxed, only at dinner, only in this room, only in the candlelight, in a way it didn't anywhere else in the penthouse. She filed all of this away in a part of her mind she wasn't visiting. It was a Saturday afternoon when the banter started. She was at her workstation reorganizing his foundation's donor correspondence. An absolute catastrophe of a filing system, with 3 years of misfiled communications that his previous coordinators had apparently dealt with by pretending it didn't exist. When he walked past, paused, and looked over her shoulder at the screen. "That's not sorted correctly," he said. "I know," she said without looking up. "I'm fixing it. It should be sorted by fiscal year, not calendar year. It will be when I'm done. I'm currently in the middle of 2022. The Hargrove correspondence should be flagged separately." "It is. I made a subfolder. It's labeled Hargrove, handle with caution." A pause. "Why does it say handle with caution?" "Because," she said, scrolling through a folder, "I read 4 years of correspondence with this man while organizing, and he has a pattern of agreeing to donation terms and then quietly revising them in the follow-up documentation. I put a note on each flagged item. You're welcome." The silence behind her had a different quality than usual. "You've been doing this for 2 hours," he said. "It's been 3, actually. It wasn't in your task list." "No, but the filing system was a problem, and problems bother me, and it's Saturday and you were in your office, so I had time." She finally looked up at him over her shoulder. "Should I have asked permission first?" He studied her for a moment. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but the precise outline of where one would be if he allowed it. "No," he said. "My good." She turned back to the screen. "Then let me finish." He stood there for another moment. She could feel it, that particular quality of his presence, the way it changed the air pressure in a room slightly. And then he said, "There's coffee." She blinked. "Did you make coffee?" "Helena did. Helena left at noon." A beat. "There's coffee," he repeated, and walked away. Nora turned slowly in her chair and looked toward the kitchen, where 2 cups sat on the counter. She pressed her lips together very firmly to keep the expression off her face. She got up and got the coffee. The almost moments began in the 4th week. The first one happened in the library, a room she had discovered on day 6 and fallen quietly in love with, all dark wood and deep chairs and thousands of books that had actually been read. She had started spending her evenings there, with his permission, technically. In that she had asked on day 6, and he had said fine, with the tone of a man who had expected to be asked at all. She was reading a novel she'd pulled from the middle shelf, something she hadn't heard of, but that turned out to be extraordinary. When he came in at 9 o'clock and stopped briefly in the doorway, she looked up. He looked at the book in her hands. "That was my father's," he said. She looked at the spine, then back at him. "I can put it back." "No." He moved to his own chair. The one at the far end, she had noticed it was always slightly angled toward the room rather than away, and opened his own book. "It's a good one." They read in silence for 2 hours. At 11, she looked up and found him watching her. Not intrusively, not with the assessing quality of the early days, but with something quieter. Something he appeared to become aware of at the same moment she noticed it, and it because he looked back at his page immediately. "Good night," she said, closing her book. "Good night," he said to the page. She was at the door when he spoke again. "What did you think of the ending?" She paused. "I haven't reached it yet." "When you do." A pause. "Tell me." She nodded once and walked out. In the hallway, she pressed her hand flat against the wall for a moment, just to feel something solid. The second almost moment was worse. Or better. She was no longer entirely sure which direction those two things ran. It was a Tuesday evening, and she had been on the phone with Lily for an hour. Her sister's voice bright and excited about a research project, the kind of enthusiasm that reminded Nora exactly why she was here, and exactly what she was doing, and exactly what mattered. When she finally hung up, she was sitting on the window seat in the library, with her knees pulled up and the city glittering below. And there was a warmth in her chest that was entirely lily-shaped. She didn't hear him come in. "Good call?" he said from the doorway. She startled, nearly dropping her phone. "Sorry, I didn't realize. I can use my room for personal calls." "I said you could use the library." "I know, She settled. "Yes, it was my sister." He came into the room then, moving to the small drinks cabinet in the corner. She watched him pour 2 fingers of something amber, and then, after a pause, not a second glass with something lighter. She'd mentioned once in passing that she didn't drink whiskey, and he set the second glass on the table beside her chair without being asked. She looked at it, sparkling water with a slice of lime. She looked at him. He sat in his chair and opened his book. "Tell me about her," he said to the page. Nora pulled her knees closer. "Lily? Your sister?" And Nora talked about Lily, the environmental science scholarship, the way she'd always been the brave one between them, the time she'd organized a town council meeting at 15 to argue against rezoning the lake, her laugh that started silent and built into something that took over her whole face. He listened without interrupting, without his phone, without any of the restlessness she'd seen in him during meetings or calls where other people talked at length. He just listened, and when she finished, he said quietly, "She sounds like you." Nora blinked. "Hannah, Lily's not like me at all. She's confident and loud, and she walks into rooms like she owns them." "That's not what I meant." He turned to Paige. "She sees problems and doesn't wait to be asked to fix them. She does things for people she loves without calculating the cost to herself." A pause. "That's you." The fireplace crackled softly. The city hummed 40 floors below. Nora sat with those words settling into her chest like something warm and slightly dangerous, and then looked at the side of his face and thought about the rule and the contract and 12 months and Lily's tuition. She thought about the way he'd said, "That's you," not as a compliment exactly, but as an observation, precise and certain, the way he said everything, as if he had been paying close enough attention to know her, as if somewhere in the past 4 weeks of coffee and dinners and silent library evenings, she had become something he had taken the time to understand. That was, she realized, more intimate than anything else that had happened in this penthouse. More intimate than the rule. More intimate than the hallway. More intimate than any almost moment. He had been watching, not in the assessing transactional way of the early days, in the way of someone who had started quietly and without announcement to care what they saw. She picked up the sparkling water. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for this." He didn't look up. "Ah, you mentioned you don't drink whiskey." "I know." A pause. "You remembered." He turned another page. He did not say, "Of course I remembered," or "it was nothing," or any of the things a person said when they were trying to manage what a gesture meant. He said nothing at all. And somehow that was the most honest thing he could have done. Nora looked at the fire and told herself very firmly that she was here for 12 months, that this was professional proximity, that warm, when attentive silences were not the same as feelings. She told herself this with great conviction. She almost believed it. Neither is naming. 4 weeks ago, she was counting the days. Now she's counting the ways he pays attention and trying very hard not to count them at all. Dearest viewers, hit the subscribe button and sit tight as we bring you the part 2 of this very interesting story.